Imagine you're standing at the edge of a beach, at low tide, somewhere warm, somewhere ordinary. The water is flat and gray. Behind you, a small town is going to sleep. In your hand, you're holding something you found in the sand. A triangle of dark enamel, heavier than it looks, the size of your open palm. It is a tooth. It is real. It is 20 million years old. And the animal it came from was, for a very long time, the largest predator that ever hunted in the sea. Now imagine that somewhere, in a quiet building with white walls and cold rooms, someone finds a way to make that animal again. Not a fossil, not a model in a museum, something breathing. What if scientists brought prehistoric predators back? That is the question we're going to sit with. Not quickly, not loudly. We're going to walk all the way around it, through what these animals actually were, how they actually lived, why they actually vanished, and then, gently, into the world that might exist if they hadn't, or if we decided that vanished was not the final word. Wherever you are right now, leave a quiet note in the comments telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I like knowing how far these journeys travel, and we should begin with something that surprises most people. This is no longer purely imagination. For most of human history, extinction was a one-way door. An animal was here, and then it was not. And the only thing left behind was bone and story. That was simply how the world worked. But in the last few decades, something changed, quietly, in laboratories, in frozen tissue banks, in the long, patient work of reading genomes. We learned to recover DNA from things that died long ago. We learned to read it, and then we learned, in small and imperfect ways, to write it. There are living animals today whose ancestors are being reassembled, letter by letter, from specimens in museum drawers. There are teams working on the woolly mammoth, using the DNA of Asian elephants as a living scaffold. There are teams working on the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, that strange striped marsupial, whose last known individual died in a zoo in 1936. There are teams looking at the passenger pigeon, once so numerous that flocks darkened the American sky for hours at a time, and then, within a single human lifetime, gone. Notice something about that list. A mammoth eats grass. A passenger pigeon eats acorns. Even the thylacine, for all its fearsome name, was a shy, dog-sized hunter of small game that no one would call a monster. Every serious de-extinction project in the world today is pointed at animals that were, in the end, harmless to us. That is not a coincidence. It's a choice. Nobody stands up in a conference room and proposes bringing back something with teeth the size of a hand. And yet, that is exactly where the imagination goes, isn't it? Not to the mammoth, to the thing that hunted the mammoth. So let me introduce you properly to the first of our guests, because before we can imagine any of them returning, you need to know who they actually were. Not the film versions, not the exaggerations, but the real animals, reconstructed from real evidence, standing in the real past. We'll start in the water. Its name is Otodus Megalodon. The second word simply means big tooth, and for a long time that was almost all we had of it. Teeth. Sharks are cartilage, not bone. Their skeletons are flexible and light, and beautifully suited to a life spent moving. And they are almost entirely gone, within weeks of death. So the sea took the body and left the teeth, and the vertebrae, and the mineral outlines of a life. But what teeth they are! The largest confirmed megalodon teeth are just over 7 inches long, around 18 centimeters, measured along the slanted edge. If you set one on a kitchen table, it would not fit inside a dinner plate. They are triangular, thick at the root, serrated along both edges, like a steak knife, and the serrations are fine and even, which tells you something specific. This was not an animal that crushed, it sliced. It was built for flesh and for a great deal of it. The teeth turn up almost everywhere. They wash out of riverbanks in South Carolina and out of cliffs in Malta. Divers pull them from the seabed off Florida. They're found in the deserts of Peru, in the phosphate mines of Morocco, in quarries in Japan, in the sediments of Australia and Chile and Belgium. Every continent except Antarctica has given up megalodon teeth. That distribution alone tells a story. This was not a local animal, it was a global one for roughly 20 million years. From about 23 million years ago until around 3.5 million years ago, there was hardly a warm coastline on Earth where you could have swum without sharing the water with it. 20 million years. Hold that number for a second, because it's easy to let it slide past. Our own species, anatomically modern humans, has existed for something like 300,000 years. Megalodon's reign was more than 60 times longer than our entire existence. It was not a brief experiment, it was an institution. And here is the detail I find most quietly moving, the one that turns it from a monster into an animal. In 2010, researchers working in the Gatun Formation in Panama described something unexpected: a dense concentration of small megalodon teeth in shallow water sediments alongside the remains of the kind of small prey a young shark would take. Not adults, juveniles. They had found a nursery. Since then, more of these sites have been proposed off the coast of Spain, in the Atlantic, elsewhere. The picture that emerges is of a species that used sheltered, warm, shallow bays as places to grow. The pups were born there, already large by our standards, already hunting, but small enough to be vulnerable. They stayed in the safe water until they were big enough for the open sea. Adults would come and go, and then, one day, each young shark left the bay and did not return, and spent the rest of its life in the blue. That is not the behavior of a mindless engine of destruction. That is the behavior of a mother and a nursery and a childhood. Whatever else Megalodon was, it was an animal with a life story. But it is only one of the names on our list. And if we're going to imagine bringing predators back, we should know who else is waiting in the drawer. Come out of the water for a moment and go inland to North America during the last ice age and meet Smilodon, the saber-tooth. Not a tiger, despite the nickname, not closely related to tigers at all. Something heavier, shorter in the leg, thick through the chest and shoulders, built less like a runner and more like a wrestler. Its famous canines could reach around 7 inches, and they were startlingly thin from side to side, flattened, almost blade-like, and surprisingly fragile. You could snap one by twisting it against bone, which means this animal could not simply bite and hold on the way a lion does. It had to grip its prey with those enormous forelimbs, hold it perfectly still, and then place the bite exactly where it needed to go. It was a specialist, a precision instrument. We know Smilodon better than almost any extinct predator, and for a slightly grim reason. The tar seeps at Rancho La Brea, in what is now Los Angeles, where sticky asphalt bubbled up through the ground and trapped animals for tens of thousands of years. Something small would get stuck. The predators would come to the easy meal, Then they would get stuck too. Thousands upon thousands of individual Smilodon have been recovered from that one place. More than enough to study injuries, aging, growth, and the bones show something unexpected. Many individuals lived for long periods with severe injuries, shattered hips, damaged spines, wounds that healed. An animal that cannot hunt does not survive for months alone, which raises the quiet possibility that they were not entirely alone. Then there's Titanoboa cerrejonensis, which lived about 58 million years ago in what is now northern Colombia, and which was found in a coal mine, vertebrae the size of a grapefruit. Estimates put it somewhere around 12 to 13 meters long and over 1,000 kilograms. A snake heavy enough that it likely spent most of its life in water, because on land, its own weight worked against it. It lived in a rainforest so hot that its very existence became a data point for climate scientists. Cold-blooded animals can only reach that size in sustained warmth, so Titanoboa's body is, in a sense, a thermometer left behind by the Paleocene. There's Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, standing on all fours at roughly the height of a person's shoulder, and when it rose, tall enough to look down on almost anything. There's Deinosuchus, a Cretaceous crocodilian around 10 meters long with teeth like banana-sized cones, which lived alongside dinosaurs and, from bite marks found on their bones, appears to have eaten some of them. There's Dunkleosteus, from the Devonian seas some 360 million years ago, an armored fish with no teeth at all. Instead, the edges of its jawbones sharpened themselves against each other every time the mouth closed, self-honing blades that never needed replacing. And there's one that vanished so recently, it feels almost rude to call it prehistoric. Haast's eagle of New Zealand, the largest eagle ever known, with a wingspan comparable to living eagles, but a body mass nearly twice as heavy, hunting flightless moa that outweighed it many times over. It disappeared around 600 years ago. There are people alive today whose great-great-great-grandparents' great-great-grandparents could have looked up and seen it. That's the shelf. That's who's waiting. Now, before we go any further into the what if, I want to plant one true thing in your mind, because it changes how the rest of this journey feels. It's this: the world hasn't finished reacting to their absence. There's an animal in North America called the pronghorn. It looks a little like an antelope. It is the second fastest land animal on Earth, capable of sustained speeds that no living North American predator can come close to matching. Nothing on that continent hunts it in a way that requires such speed. Nothing has for a very long time. Biologists sometimes describe the pronghorn as running from a ghost, because the animal it evolved to outrun, a cheetah-like cat called Miracinonyx, has been gone for roughly 10,000 years. The pronghorn hasn't been told. It still runs. You can find these ghosts everywhere once you know to look for them. There are trees in Central America with large, heavy fruits that no living animal can properly swallow and carry away. Fruits that seem designed for a mouth that no longer exists. There are birds that flinch at shadows in a shape no current predator makes. There are forests whose spacing and structure still reflect grazing pressure from herds that stopped existing before the pyramids were built. The world is full of predator-shaped holes, which is really the heart of tonight's question. When we picture bringing back a great extinct hunter, we tend to picture a single animal arriving into a world that is otherwise unchanged. A shark in our ocean, a cat in our hills. But that isn't what would happen, and the rest of this journey is about why. Because these animals didn't merely live in their worlds. They shaped them. They pruned them, thinned them, herded them, sculpted them. They decided where whales gave birth and how deep seals dared to dive and which forests grew thick and which stayed open. Take one of them out, and the world reorganizes itself around the gap. Put one of them back, and it must reorganize all over again. So here's where we're going from here. Next, we'll deal with the thing everyone wants to know first, and almost everyone gets slightly wrong. The size, not the exaggerated size, the real one, measured, argued over, revised, and still astonishing, because when you're told a number in meters, it means very little. It only becomes real when you put it beside something you already know, a bus, a doorway, a room you've been in. And I think you'll find that the real numbers don't need any help at all. Let's begin there. There's a problem with numbers, and it's worth naming before we start using them. If I tell you an animal was 18 meters long, something happens in your mind. But it isn't understanding. It's a kind of polite nodding. The number goes in, sits there, and means almost nothing because you have no 18-meter-shaped memory to place it against. Meters are abstract. Rooms are not. Buses are not. Doorways are not. So, for this part of the journey, we're going to do something slow and deliberate. Every number I give you, I'll hand you something familiar to hold it against. And I want you to notice that the real, measured, conservative, peer-reviewed figures need absolutely no exaggeration. The temptation with these animals is always to inflate them. It's completely unnecessary. The truth is stranger. Let's go back to the shark. The strange thing about Megalodon is that its size has been argued about for over a century, and the argument has generally gone in one direction, downward. In 1909, at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, a reconstruction was built. An enormous set of jaws assembled from fossil teeth, wide enough that several men could sit inside the arch shoulder to shoulder. There's a famous photograph of exactly that. It suggested an animal around 30 meters long. It was a magnificent piece of work, and it was wrong because the largest teeth had been placed everywhere, and real shark jaws don't work that way. Teeth vary enormously in size depending on their position in the mouth. So the estimates came down, and they came down again. And what's remarkable is where they settled. The modern approach uses the relationship between tooth height and body length in living sharks, particularly the great white, which is Megalodon's closest analog in shape, if not in family. Feed the fossil teeth through those relationships, and you get an animal that typically ran somewhere between 15 and 18 meters, with the very largest individuals possibly reaching 20. Body mass estimates have ranged widely, but recent work tends to land somewhere around 50 tons, with the largest reconstructions pushing considerably higher. Now let's give those numbers a body you can stand next to. In 2021, a team led by researchers in the UK published a full-body reconstruction of a 16-meter Megalodon. Not the biggest possible individual, a fairly typical adult. They worked out proportions for each part. The head alone came out at roughly 4.5 meters. That is longer than most family cars. The tail fin stood nearly 4 meters tall. And the dorsal fin, the part you'd see if it surfaced, was about 1.5 meters from base to tip. Sit with that one for a moment. The dorsal fin was roughly as tall as an adult human being. If you were standing in shallow water and that fin passed by you, it would rise from the surface to somewhere above your eyes. Not the shark. The fin, the body itself, 16 meters. A standard city bus is around 12 meters long, so the animal was a bus, plus a small car parked behind it. A bowling lane from the foul line to the head pin is about 18 meters. The largest Megalodon estimates would have filled that lane end to end, with nothing left over. Then there's the mouth. Reconstructions put the jaw gape at around 2 meters across and not far off 2 meters tall. Think about the doorway of the room you're in. A standard interior door is about 2 meters high and 80 centimeters wide. Megalodon's open mouth was taller than that door and more than twice as wide. It could have swallowed the door frame whole and the force behind it. In 2008, a team modeled Megalodon's bite using computer analysis of jaw musculature scaled from great whites. The figure they arrived at was somewhere between 108,000 and 182,000 newtons. To make that mean something, a great white shark bites at roughly 18,000 newtons. A large saltwater crocodile, which holds the record among living animals, manages around 16,000. A strong human bite is around 1,300. So the most powerful jaws on Earth today would need to bite 10 times harder to match it. But here's the part that people consistently underfeel, and I think it's the single most useful idea in this whole chapter. Length is a liar. A great white shark, a genuinely large one, reliably measured, runs around 6 meters and weighs perhaps 2 tons. Megalodon at 18 meters is 3 times longer. 3 times. That sounds manageable. A big cousin, a scaled-up version. But animals are not lines. They're volumes. When you triple every dimension of a body, length, width, depth, the volume doesn't triple, it goes up by 3 cubed, 27 times. So an 18-meter Megalodon wasn't 3 times a great white. It was, in terms of actual flesh and bone and muscle, somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 times a great white. Put it another way, if you took a large great white and set it beside a large Megalodon, you would need a school of roughly 30 great whites to equal the one animal, not a rival, not a bigger version, a different order of thing entirely. And yet, and this matters because it keeps us honest, Megalodon was not the largest animal in its ocean. It wasn't even close. Blue whales, which were already present in some form during parts of that era and which still swim today, reach 24 to 30 meters and can exceed 150 tons. A blue whale is 3 times the mass of the largest Megalodon. The biggest animal that has ever existed on this planet is alive right now, and it eats things smaller than your fingernail. What Megalodon held was a different title: the largest macropredator, the largest animal that has ever hunted large prey, one animal at a time, and taken it apart. That's the crown, and the fossil record backs it up in the most direct way possible. Whale bones from that era, ribs and vertebrae and flipper bones, carrying deep gouges and slice marks that match the serrated edge of those teeth. Some of the marks show healing. Some of the whales got away, and it wasn't alone up there. This is a fact I love. because it dismantles the idea that Megalodon simply ruled an empty sea. Swimming in the same waters at the same time was an animal called Leviathan melvillei, a relative of the sperm whale, described in 2010 from a skull found in the desert of Peru, around 14 to 17 meters long. And unlike modern sperm whales, which have teeth only in the lower jaw and feed largely on squid, Leviathan had functional teeth in both jaws. Some of them were 36 centimeters long. That is the largest biting tooth of any animal known, living or extinct, longer than your forearm, and it belonged to a warm-blooded, air-breathing, almost certainly highly intelligent hunter that shared a coastline with Megalodon for millions of years. Two apex predators, both enormous, both eating the same whales in the same seas, without either one erasing the other. That's not a monster story. That's an ecosystem. Now let's come ashore, because scale on land follows different rules and hits differently. Smilodon comes in more than one size. The North American species, Smilodon fatalis, weighed somewhere between 160 and 280 kilograms. That already puts it above most lions. But the South American species, Smilodon populator, ran considerably larger. Estimates for big individuals reach around 400 kilograms. The heaviest reliably recorded wild Siberian tiger, the largest cat alive today, was around 300 kilograms, so Smilodon populator was, at its upper end, roughly a third heavier than the largest living cat, and it carried that weight differently. Shorter limbs, deeper chest, thicker bones. Studies of the internal structure of its forelimb bones found them denser and more heavily reinforced than a lion's, the anatomical signature of an animal that regularly used its arms to hold something enormous still while it worked. The famous canines, around 18 to 20 centimeters of visible blade. With the root, the total tooth was closer to 28. Take a ruler and hold your fingers apart at 18 centimeters. That's the exposed part. Now imagine two of those. Sliding out of a closed mouth, Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, is a good lesson in scientific humility. For decades, it was described as an absolute titan, and older estimates put it near a ton. More careful modern work, using limb bone measurements, has generally pulled that downward. Large males now tend to be reconstructed somewhere in the range of 600 to 900 kilograms, with some estimates lower still. That's less dramatic than the old figures. It's also still, quietly, larger than almost any polar bear ever weighed. On all fours, its shoulder sat somewhere around the height of a tall person's chest. Standing, it could look over the roof of a car. Titanoboa asks you to rethink a shape rather than a size. 12 to 13 meters and around 1,100 kilograms. The largest green anacondas reliably measured come in around 6 to 7 meters and perhaps 200 kilograms. So Titanoboa was roughly twice the length and something like 5 times the mass. But length isn't the striking part. At its thickest point, around the middle of the body, Titanoboa is reconstructed at close to 1 meter in diameter, which means that if it lay stretched out across the floor in front of you, the top of the animal, just the body, not raised, not coiled, simply lying there, would reach somewhere around your waist. You would not be able to step over it. You would have to climb. Dinosuchus, the Cretaceous crocodilian, reached 10 to 12 meters, the largest saltwater crocodiles today, the biggest reptilian predators alive. top out around 6 or 7, so double. Its teeth were not blades, but thick cones, some of them roughly the size and shape of a banana, built for crushing rather than slicing, which fits the bones found bearing its bite marks, including those of dinosaurs. And then, in the other direction, a correction that I think is genuinely charming, Dunkleosteus, the armored Devonian fish, was for many years reconstructed at 8 or 9 meters, based on scaling its armored head against modern sharks. In 2023, a study argued that method was flawed, that comparing it to fish with a similar body plan produced a very different result, and proposed a length closer to 3 and a half or 4 meters. That's less than half the old figure. And rather than being disappointing, it's a small demonstration of how this field actually works. These animals are not fixed. They are arguments, made of evidence, revised whenever the evidence improves. A 4-meter Dunkleosteus with self-sharpening jawbone blades, biting at several thousand newtons at the tip, remains one of the most extraordinary predators the oceans have ever produced. It just isn't the size we thought. One more, and this one is close enough to touch. Haast's eagle of New Zealand, females weighed somewhere between 10 and 15 kilograms. A bald eagle weighs 4 to 6. Its wingspan, around 2.5 to 3 meters, wasn't dramatically greater than large living eagles. And that's the interesting part. It flew in dense forest, where enormous wings are a liability, so it packed its mass into body and legs instead. Its talons have been compared in size to a tiger's claws. It killed moa, flightless birds that could weigh 200 kilograms, by striking from above at speed and driving those talons into the pelvis. An eagle that hunted animals 15 times its own weight, and it was still doing it around 600 years ago. Now step back and look at all of it together, because there's a pattern worth noticing. None of these animals were oversized by accident. Size is expensive. Every extra kilogram must be fed every day for a lifetime. A body only grows to that scale when the world around it can afford to pay for it. When there is enough energy, enough prey, enough warmth, enough time. Megalodon existed because the oceans were full of slow, fat, abundant whales in warm, shallow seas. Smilodon existed because the plains carried herds of bison and horses and camels and young mammoths. Titanoboa existed because the rainforest it lived in was hot enough for long enough to keep a cold-blooded body running at that mass. These animals are not just large, they are receipts. Each one is a record of how much energy its world had to spare, which leads directly to the harder question, and the one we'll take up next. If the world could afford them once, what changed? Because none of these animals were defeated. Nothing hunted Megalodon down. Nothing outfought Smilodon. They ended for quieter reasons, reasons involving temperature and coastlines and food and time. Let's follow that. Nothing killed Megalodon. That's the first thing to set down, because the imagination reaches instinctively for a battle, some larger rival, some catastrophe. A single dramatic ending. There wasn't one. And once you understand how these animals actually lived, the real reasons feel less like a defeat and more like a slow withdrawal of the conditions that made them possible. So, let's look at the living animal first. For a long time, sharks were assumed to be cold-blooded in the simple sense, body temperature matching the water around them. But some sharks aren't. Great whites, makos, poor beagles, and a handful of others use a heat exchange system in their blood vessels to keep the muscles, the gut, sometimes the brain and eyes, warmer than the sea. It's called regional endothermy, and it buys you a great deal. Faster muscles, quicker digestion, the ability to hunt in cooler water without slowing down. In recent years, researchers have measured the isotopes locked in Megalodon tooth enamel, chemical signatures that record temperature at the moment the tooth formed. The results suggest Megalodon was doing the same thing and doing it to a greater degree than any shark alive today. Estimates put its body several degrees above the surrounding water, warm enough that it stands apart even from the great white. That single fact reshapes everything else. A warm body is a fast body, a wide-ranging body, a body that can follow prey into cooler seas. It's also, and this becomes important, an extraordinarily expensive body. Heat has to be generated, and heat is generated by food. A regionally warm animal, weighing 50 tons, is a furnace that never gets to go out. So what fed it? The record is unusually clear here, because feeding leaves marks, fossilized whale bones from the Miocene and Pliocene, carry deep parallel gouges across ribs, vertebrae, shoulder blades, and flipper bones. The spacing and serration matching Megalodon teeth. Some specimens have teeth still embedded in them, and the pattern of the marks is telling. A great many of them cluster on the flippers and the tail region rather than the body. That points to a strategy, not a single overwhelming strike, but an attack on the parts that make a whale a whale. The propulsion, the steering, disable the flipper, disable the fluke, and a 20-ton animal that could otherwise simply leave becomes something that cannot. The rest follows at leisure. Its world was made for this. Through much of Megalodon's reign, sea levels were higher, and the continents were fringed with broad, warm, shallow shelves. Those shelves were nurseries for Megalodon, but also for the small and medium-sized baleen whales that filled the Miocene seas. There were far more species of them then than now, and many were modest in size, 6 to 10 meters, coastal, slow, abundant, warm water, shallow bays, fat prey that came to the same places every year to give birth. It was, from a shark's point of view, an almost perfect arrangement. And then, over the last several million years of the Pliocene, the arrangement came apart. Not violently, piece by piece, the planet cooled, ice accumulated at the poles, water that had been ocean became ice sheet, and global sea level fell. And when sea level falls, the first thing to disappear is exactly the thing Megalodon depended on most: the shallow shelf, those warm, protected, waist-deep bays where the pups spent their early years drained away and became coastal plain. The nurseries closed. At the same time, the whales were changing. Many of the small and mid-sized coastal species declined and vanished. The survivors went in a different direction, larger, faster, and crucially migratory, traveling to feed in the cold, productive waters near the poles. A whale that spends its summers in freezing water is a whale that has effectively moved out of reach of an animal built for warm seas, however well insulated it might be. And the neighborhood was filling up. The modern great white appears in the fossil record around 4 million years ago. Smaller, cheaper to run, more flexible in diet, perfectly happy in cold water. zinc isotope studies comparing the two species suggest their diets genuinely overlapped. Meanwhile, the ancestors of orcas were developing the thing Megalodon could never answer: coordinated group hunting, with communication, teaching, and tactics that scale. Put it together and you don't get a war. You get arithmetic. A 50-ton warm-bodied predator needs an enormous, reliable, accessible food supply. Take away the shallow nurseries. Take away the easy coastal whales. Add competitors that need far less and work together. And the numbers stop balancing, not suddenly, over hundreds of thousands of years. Slightly fewer successful births each generation. Slightly longer between meals. A range that contracts a little each century. Somewhere around 3.5 million years ago, the last one died. It very probably died old and alone, and unremarkably, in water that had simply stopped being able to afford it. That is the shape of almost every story on our list. Smilodon lived on plains that we would find astonishing. North America during the Pleistocene carried horses, camels, bison, ground sloths the size of cars, mastodons, mammoths, a landscape as rich as the Serengeti, and in some periods richer. Smilodon was built precisely for it. An ambush specialist that needed large, heavy, relatively slow prey it could wrestle to a standstill. Those thin, magnificent canines only made sense against a big animal held still. Then, in a geological blink between roughly 15 and 10,000 years ago, that entire community collapsed. The climate swung hard and repeatedly. Vegetation zones tore apart and reassembled, and humans arrived in growing numbers, hunting the same large animals. The debate about how much weight to give each factor is still genuinely live. It's one of the great unsettled arguments in the field, but the outcome isn't in question. The big prey went, and a predator that could only work on big prey had nowhere to go. The tar pits record the end in a strangely intimate way. The last Smilodon at Rancho La Brea date to around the same window as the last of the giant herbivores. They ran out together. Titanoboa's ending is the quietest of all, because nothing hunted it and nothing outcompeted it. It simply needed heat. A cold-blooded animal of that mass can only maintain itself in sustained tropical warmth, and it lived during one of the hottest stretches of the last 100 million years. When the long global cooling began, the ceiling on snake size came down with the temperature. There was no dramatic final individual. There was a maximum possible size that got smaller every million years, until nothing like Titanoboa could exist at all. And then there's Haast's eagle, which is the exception and the uncomfortable one, because its ending is not ambiguous in the slightest. New Zealand had no land mammals to speak of. Birds filled every role, including the largest herbivores. The moa, up to 200 kilograms, flightless, unhurried, with no ground predators at all. The eagle evolved to hunt them and hunted nothing else of consequence. People arrived around 750 years ago. Within roughly a century and a half, every species of moa was gone, and the eagle, whose entire existence was built on a single kind of prey, followed almost immediately. It was not persecuted. It was not competed with. Its food was removed, and it ended. Look across all of them, and the same shape keeps appearing. Almost none of these animals were beaten. They were unfunded. The world stopped underwriting them, and there's a bitter elegance to it, because the very things that made them magnificent are what made them fragile. Enormous size means enormous appetite. Specialization means brilliance at one job and helplessness at every other. A creature perfectly adapted to a particular world is, by definition, a creature that cannot survive that world changing. The better the fit, the narrower the ledge. Megalodon was too expensive. Smilodon was too specialized. Titanoboa was too dependent on heat. Haast's eagle was too tied to a single prey. Each of them was, in its own way, a masterpiece with no second option. There is one more thing worth saying before we move on, and it's the thing that makes all of this feel less distant than it should. These extinctions did not happen in some sealed-off prehistory. Megalodon disappeared 3.5 million years ago, which is genuinely deep time. But Smilodon was still hunting 10,000 years ago, after the last ice age peaked, while humans were painting cave walls and beginning to plant seeds. The short-faced bear was still walking North America then, and Haast's eagle was flying over New Zealand at roughly the same time that cathedrals were being built in Europe. We did not miss these animals by an unimaginable gulf. In several cases, we missed them by a few hundred generations. Our species and theirs overlapped, watched each other, and in some places competed. The world that contained them is not a different planet. It's this one, a short while ago, with a few pieces still in place that have since been removed. So that is what really happened. But tonight, let's imagine that it didn't. Let's imagine that somewhere in that chain of small losses, the closing bays, the vanishing herds, the cooling seas, the arithmetic came out differently, or, if you prefer, that it came out exactly as it did, and then, much later, in a quiet room with cold cabinets and careful hands, somebody found the way to run it backwards. It doesn't matter which door we walk through. What matters is what's on the other side. Because from here on, the question stops being what was and becomes what would be. And the first thing to understand is that a returned predator does not simply arrive in the world. The world has to make room. Every returning animal needs somewhere to be. Water of the right temperature, prey of the right size, coastline of the right shape. So before we look at the animals, let's look at the space. Let's take the world exactly as it is right now, tonight, with its shipping lanes and its warming seas and its emptied coastlines, and ask a very simple question. Where exactly would they go? Start with the water, because that's where the biggest question lives. If Megalodon returned tomorrow, the first thing it would need is warmth. Its whole physiology was built around warm and temperate seas. A body that ran hot, but not hot enough to make the polar oceans comfortable. So we can draw its map fairly confidently. A broad belt around the tropics and subtropics, reaching further north and south along the western edges of continents, where warm currents run. The Gulf Stream up the American East Coast and across toward Europe, the Kuroshio past Japan, the Agulhas down the coast of southern Africa, the East Australian Current. And here's the first surprise. The ocean it would return to is, in one specific way, more hospitable than the one it left. The surface of the sea is warmer now than it was during the cooling that pushed Megalodon out. The warm belt has widened. Waters that were marginal for it 3.5 million years ago are comfortably within range today, and getting more so. Tropical species of fish and turtle and shark have been steadily extending their ranges toward the poles for decades. We can watch it happening. So the temperature door, which closed on Megalodon, has partly reopened. That's true, and it's slightly unsettling, But temperature is only the invitation. Food is the reason to stay. And here the modern ocean is genuinely strange because it has been emptied and partly refilled within living memory. Industrial whaling in the 20th century removed something on the order of 3 million great whales. It was the largest removal of animal biomass humans have ever carried out, and it happened in about 70 years. Then mostly it stopped, and the whales began coming back. Humpbacks are the clearest case. In parts of the southern hemisphere, populations that had been reduced to a few hundred individuals now number in the tens of thousands. Gray whales along the Pacific coast of North America recovered strongly enough to be taken off the endangered list, though their numbers have fluctuated since. Southern right whales, blue whales in some regions, fin whales, the curves are uneven. Some populations are still struggling, but the overall direction across many species has been upward. The seals came back too, and in some places spectacularly. Northern elephant seals were hunted down to perhaps 100 animals on a single island off Mexico. Today there are well over 200,000. Gray seals on both sides of the Atlantic have multiplied. California sea lions crowd harbors and haulouts by the tens of thousands. Cape fur seals off southern Africa number in the millions. So the prey exists. The larder is not empty. What's changed is the shape of it. And this is the thing that would define a returned megalodon's entire existence. Megalodon's world was a pasture. Warm, shallow shelves ran along the continents, and small coastal whales lived and bred across them. Spread out, present more or less everywhere the water was warm and shallow. You didn't have to go looking, you lived in the middle of it. The modern ocean is not a pasture, it's a road network. Today's great whales are migrators. They feed in cold, productive water near the poles in summer, then travel thousands of kilometers to warm, sheltered water to give birth in winter, which means their biomass is not spread evenly. It's concentrated into corridors and destinations, appearing and disappearing on a schedule. Think about what that means for a predator that can't follow them into the cold. It doesn't hunt the ocean, it waits at the doors. And the doors are astonishingly specific. On the Pacific coast of Baja California, there are shallow lagoons. Ojo de Liebre, San Ignacio, Magdalena Bay, where gray whales arrive every winter to calve. Warm, shallow, protected water, packed for months with newborn whales and exhausted mothers. In Hawaiian waters, humpbacks gather each winter to breed and give birth in shallow channels between the islands. Off the Dominican Republic, the Silver Bank fills with humpbacks. Along the coast of Argentina, Peninsula Valdez hosts southern right whales and their calves in bays you could wade into. Every one of these places is warm, shallow, seasonal, predictable, and full of large young animals learning to swim. If you designed a feeding ground for Megalodon from first principles, you would design exactly this. The lagoons would also solve its other problem. Remember that Megalodon needed nurseries, sheltered shallow water, where pups could grow before facing the open sea. Those are still here. Florida Bay and the Gulf Shallows, the Bahamas Banks, the Caribbean Shelf, the vast lagoon inside the Great Barrier Reef, the shallow seas of Indonesia and the Philippines, the Persian Gulf, warm as bathwater and nowhere deep. There is no shortage of nursery habitat on this planet. There is only one complication with all of it, and it's the same complication in every case. Those are our waters, not in the legal sense, in the practical, daily, crowded sense. The warm, shallow shelves of the world are where the ports are, where the fishing fleets work, where the cruise ships anchor, where the whale-watching boats idle with 50 people leaning over the rail. San Ignacio Lagoon is famous precisely because gray whales there approach small boats and let people touch them. The Great Barrier Reef carries millions of visitors a year. The Florida Keys are one continuous recreational waterway. Megalodon's habitat and human coastal life are not neighbors. They are the same square kilometers. There's something else waiting for it too, and it's the detail I find most quietly interesting. The ocean has changed in a way that has nothing to do with temperature or prey. It's loud now. Before engines, the sea carried storm noise, wave noise, ice, and the voices of animals. Now the low-frequency background across large parts of the ocean is dominated by shipping. Tens of thousands of vessels turning propellers day and night. Plus, seismic surveys, sonar, construction. In some busy regions, the ambient noise floor has risen substantially over the past several decades. Whales have been documented calling louder, calling at different frequencies, or falling silent when ships pass. And sharks perceive the world in a way that would make the modern ocean stranger still. They have electroreceptors, small jelly-filled canals in the snout, the ampullae of Lorenzini, sensitive enough to detect the faint electrical fields produced by a hidden animal's muscles. It's an exquisite sense, tuned to the tiny voltages of living bodies. We have since filled the seabed with power cables and communication lines, and the water with metal hulls that generate their own weak fields. To an animal reading the ocean electrically, the coastal shelf is no longer quiet, it hums. Now come ashore, because the land tells a different version of the same story. Smilodon needed open country with large, heavy, catchable prey. The North American plains that supported it are now, over huge areas, cropland, corn and soy and wheat, where bison herds once moved. On the face of it, the habitat is gone. But look more closely, and the continent is not empty at all. It's full. It's just full of different things. White-tailed deer in the United States number in the tens of millions, more than were likely present when Europeans arrived. Elk exist in the hundreds of thousands. Feral hogs, heavy, aggressive, and abundant, run into the millions across the southern states. Wild horses roam public lands in the West. And then there's the largest fact of all, one that's easy to look straight past. There are roughly 90 million cattle in the United States. Worldwide, something in the region of 1.5 billion in sheer weight of large, slow-moving herbivore flesh. This planet has never carried more. The great Pleistocene herds that Smilodon evolved to hunt have not disappeared from the world. They've been replaced, at far greater density, by animals that are bigger, slower, less wary, and standing behind wire fences that would mean nothing whatsoever to a 400-kilogram cat. New Zealand is even neater. Haast's eagle lost its moa. New Zealand today holds tens of millions of sheep, several million cattle, and a large introduced population of red deer moving through exactly the kind of forest and open country mosaic the eagle hunted in. A bird that specialized in dropping onto slow, flightless, ground-dwelling herbivores would find its ecological job description filled again, in a form it could hardly have hoped for. And then there are the ones for whom the modern world simply isn't ready. Titanoboa is the clearest case. It needed sustained heat, average temperatures well above what the tropics deliver today. The Amazon, for all its warmth, sits several degrees cooler than the rainforest Titanoboa lived in. A returned Titanoboa would not thrive there. It would be sluggish, slower to digest, slower to grow, and its descendants would shrink over generations toward whatever size the current climate could actually sustain. The world has a maximum snake size set by temperature, and right now that ceiling is far below where it was, though the ceiling is rising. So take the map as a whole. Warm water, expanded, large prey, abundant, but rearranged into corridors and enclosures. Shallow nurseries, intact and occupied by us. Quiet, gone. Deep heat, not quite there yet. The world has not kept these animals' habitats in a glass case waiting for them. It has taken the pieces apart, moved them around, and put most of them back down in different places, which raises the next question, and it's a more interesting one than it first appears. A habitat is not really made of water and grass and temperature. A habitat is made of other animals, the ones you eat, the ones that eat you, the ones you compete with, the ones that clean up after you, and every one of those roles has been filled by somebody else in the meantime. They wouldn't be returning to an empty stage. They'd be returning to a stage where every part has already been recast. So let's meet the current cast. The mistake is to picture an empty ocean. We tend to imagine a returned Megalodon gliding into water that has been holding its place, as though the top of the food chain has stood vacant for 3.5 million years, waiting. It hasn't. The position was filled almost immediately, and the animal that filled it is still there. And it is not what most people expect. It's the orca, not the largest, not the strongest, individually, but by any honest measure, the apex predator of every ocean on this planet, from the ice edge to the equator, with no exceptions. Nothing hunts an adult orca, nothing ever has, as far as we can tell. And the reason isn't size, it's everything else. An orca pod is not a group of animals that happen to be near each other. It's a matriline, a grandmother, her daughters, their offspring, often staying together for life, in some populations for 50 or 60 years. They have dialects, distinct call repertoires that differ between pods and persist across generations, learned rather than inherited. They have specialized hunting techniques passed down like craft. Different populations eat entirely different things and will not touch each other's food. The techniques themselves are the part that stops you. In Antarctica, some pods hunt seals, resting on ice floes by swimming in tight formation toward the ice, generating a coordinated wave that washes the seal off. They practice it. They abort and rerun it if the angle is wrong. In Patagonia, certain families deliberately strand themselves on shingle beaches to snatch sea lion pups from the shallows, then work their way back into the water, a technique that takes years to learn and is taught by adults to juveniles in shallow, safe conditions first. And off Western Australia, in the last several years, researchers have repeatedly documented pods hunting and killing adult blue whales, the largest animal that has ever existed on Earth, taken down by coordinated groups of animals, a fraction of its size. So when we imagine Megalodon returning to the top of the ocean, we have to be honest about the fact that the current occupant already kills things larger than Megalodon. There's a more specific and more haunting piece of evidence, though, and it comes from South Africa. Since around 2017, two male orcas, known locally by the shape of their collapsed dorsal fins, have been killing great white sharks along the South African coast. The carcasses wash ashore with a precise wound behind the pectoral fin and the liver removed. Sometimes the heart, nothing else taken. Shark liver is enormous, oil-rich, and enormously calorific, and these two animals learned how to extract it surgically. What happened next is the part that matters. The great whites of False Bay, a population that had been studied for decades, famous worldwide for breaching hunts on seals, did not fight back and did not adapt. They left. Sightings collapsed. A well-established aggregation of the ocean's most iconic predator effectively abandoned an entire region because two individuals of another species showed up. That is the world Megalodon would be swimming into, not an empty throne, an occupied one, held by something that hunts as a network. And the comparison cuts in an uncomfortable direction. Megalodon was, as far as we can infer from shark biology, solitary. Sharks are not social in the way cetaceans are. There's no evidence for cooperative hunting, no evidence of teaching, no long-term family structure. Megalodon was a magnificent individual solution. Orcas are a distributed one. Bigger jaws lose to better coordination more often than we like to think. There are others waiting, too. The sperm whale is the largest toothed predator alive. Males reaching 16 to 18 meters and 50 tons or more, diving to depths where the water pressure would crush a submarine. Hunting squid in total darkness by sound. When threatened, sperm whales form what whalers called the marguerite. The pod arranges itself in a rosette, heads together at the center, protecting calves in the middle, tails outward. A sperm whale's tail is several meters wide and swung by an animal the weight of a house. It is not a defensive gesture, it is a wall of clubs. And the great white, which we tend to think of as the small cousin, has a quiet advantage. It costs less. It eats seals and fish and carrion. It tolerates cold water Megalodon can't work in. It matures faster, and it needs a tiny fraction of the daily food. In any direct encounter, Megalodon wins. In the long arithmetic of who can survive a lean decade, it doesn't. Come ashore, and the picture inverts. North America's largest land carnivores today are the grizzly, the mountain lion, and the wolf. A big grizzly might reach 400 kilograms, but it's an omnivore that spends much of its year on roots and berries and fish. A mountain lion weighs 60 to 80 kilograms, a superb ambush hunter, but roughly a quarter the mass of a large Smilodon. Wolves average 40 kilograms and win through numbers and endurance. Drop Smilodon populator into that lineup, and there is simply nothing to contest it. On raw physical terms, it would be the heaviest predator on the continent, and by some distance the strongest per unit of body length. A mountain lion would abandon a kill instantly. A wolf pack might hold its ground and would probably lose. Only a large grizzly would be worth arguing with, and grizzlies solve arguments the same way they always have, by taking the carcass and letting the other animal walk away. But the real story on land isn't about fights between predators. It's about what happens to the prey. And here we have something better than speculation. We have a real experiment, run at continental scale, that anyone can look up. In 1995 and 1996, wolves were returned to Yellowstone after roughly 70 years of absence. Elk in the park had spent those decades without any serious predator. They had become, in a very specific sense, careless, grazing in open valleys and along stream banks, standing in one place for as long as the food lasted, browsing willow and aspen and cottonwood down to stumps year after year. When wolves returned, elk numbers fell. That much is straightforward. But the more interesting change was behavioral, and it happened fast. Elk stopped lingering in the places where they couldn't see far or run easily. The narrow valleys, the river bottoms, the willow thickets. Researchers called it the ecology of fear, the idea that a predator changes a landscape not only by killing, but by making certain places expensive to stand in. And where elk stopped standing, willows and aspens began to grow again. Where willows grew, beavers found building material, and beaver colonies in the park's northern range increased substantially from near absence. Beaver dams created ponds, and ponds created habitat for amphibians and fish and birds. Now, an honest caveat, because this story gets told too neatly, you may have heard a version where wolves change the rivers. Ecologists have spent years arguing about how much of the recovery is attributable to wolves versus drought cycles, bison numbers, the return of cougars and bears, and simple climate variation. The strong version is oversimplified. The core finding is not. One predator returned to a landscape, measurably rearranged how the herbivores used space, and the vegetation responded. That's 40-kilogram wolves. Now scale the thought. The prey animals of North America today have no experience of anything like Smilodon. Deer are alert, but they're tuned to coyotes and cougars, fast light hunters that they can often outrun. They have no behavioral answer for a 400-kilogram ambush specialist that doesn't chase because it doesn't need to. Cattle have even less. Domestic cattle have spent thousands of years being selected for calmness and stand in open fields with no cover, no escape planning, and no herd defense to speak of. Naivety wears off, but it takes generations, and it's paid for in bodies. New Zealand would be the strangest case of all, because Heyst's eagle would return to a country whose current top predators are stoats, feral cats, and possums, none of which weigh more than a few kilograms. There would be no competitor at all, and an animal that evolved to strike 200-kilogram moa from above would find hillsides covered in slow, fenced, entirely defenseless sheep. One last thing, and it's the one that rarely gets mentioned. A returned predator would arrive biologically alone. Every animal alive today carries an immune system shaped by millions of years of exposure to the specific pathogens of its era, and a gut microbiome inherited from its mother and its food. A creature reconstructed in a laboratory has neither. It would meet modern marine viruses, modern bacteria, modern parasites, with defenses calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And it would have no mother to seed its digestion, no pod, no pride, nothing to teach it what to eat or how. The most dangerous thing in the ocean might well be undone by something too small to see. That's the situation. Laid out honestly, a magnificent animal returning to a warm and crowded world, into a role that has been reassigned, surrounded by neighbors it has never met. But laying it out is one thing, standing in it is another. So let's stop analyzing and let's simply go there. One place, one stretch of coast, one full turn of the day, from the first gray light to the dark. No arguments, no numbers, just what it would be like to be present in a world where they came back. Let's put you somewhere specific. It's the coast of Baja California. On the Pacific side, in February, a long, shallow lagoon lies behind a bar of pale sand, connected to the open ocean by a single channel. You're staying in a low building at the lagoon's edge. Concrete floor, one window facing west, a metal-framed bed, a jug of water on the table. There's no glass in the window, just a wooden shutter propped open. You've been awake for a while, not anxious, just awake, in the way you sometimes are in an unfamiliar place, listening. The first thing you notice is that the air is cool and the ground is not. The sand outside gave up its heat hours ago, but the concrete under your feet is still holding a little warmth from yesterday. There's salt on everything. You can taste it faintly at the back of your throat. And there's a fine, gritty film on the table, on the windowsill, on the rim of the water jug. Outside, it's the hour before any light. The lagoon is completely flat. You can't see it, but you can hear it, a slow, regular breathing sound. Water moving against the sandbar and drawing back. Not waves so much as the water shifting its weight from one side to the other. And then, out in the middle of the dark, something exhales. It's a long, hollow, rushing sound, like a door being opened onto wind. It takes several seconds, then a pause, and another one further off, deeper, then a third. There are whales out there in the black water, 40 or 50 of them, breathing at their own separate rhythms, and the sound carries so well across the flat surface that they might be right below the window. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and sit on the step, and you listen to them for a long time. And gradually the sky behind the hills turns the color of weak tea. Light comes to the lagoon before the sun does. The water goes from black to gray to a soft pearl, and shapes begin to resolve. Backs, dozens of low dark backs, mottled with pale patches, rolling slowly at the surface and sinking again. Some of them are enormous. Some of them are astonishingly small. Calves, only a few weeks old, staying tucked against their mother's flanks, coming up more often because their lungs are new. The gray whales come here every winter. They travel down from the Arctic 10,000 kilometers to give birth in water so shallow that in places a mother has to lie on her side to turn around. It's warm here and calm, and there's nothing dangerous inside the lagoon. That last part is what's changed. You walk down to the water's edge as the sun clears the hills behind you. The sand is cold and packed hard and holds your footprints perfectly. There are other tracks in it. The small, delicate crosses of shorebirds. The drag line of something that came out of the water in the night and went back in. Coyote prints, too, coming down the beach in a straight, purposeful line and then turning out past the sandbar where the lagoon meets the open Pacific. The water changes color. Pale green becomes a deeper, blue-green becomes further out, something close to slate. And that's where you look, because that's where everyone looks now. For a long while, nothing. Pelicans go past in a line, 6 of them, so low that their wingtips almost touch the water, riding the cushion of air off the surface without a single beat between them. A group of dolphins works along the outer edge of the bar. You see the small rolling wheel of their fins and hear the quick, sharp puffs of their breathing, much faster and higher than the whales. The sun gets warm on the back of your neck. You take the blanket off, and then, out past the channel, maybe 2 kilometers away, the water does something odd. It isn't a splash, it's a hill, a low, smooth swelling of the surface that rises where nothing should be rising, holds, and slides sideways. Behind it, a dark blade comes up, a fin, standing clear of the water, upright and slightly curved. And even at this distance, you can tell that it is not proportioned like anything you've seen. It is too tall relative to how far apart the ripples are. Your eye keeps trying to place it closer to make the size make sense, and your eye keeps being wrong. It travels the length of the channel mouth without hurrying. There's no wake to speak of, just that mound of raised water moving with it, and the fin cutting a line so straight it looks drawn. Then it goes down, and the surface smooths over, and the sea looks exactly as it did before. You stand there for a while afterwards, with your arms folded, not because you're cold. The whales in the lagoon did not react. That's the thing you turn over as you walk back. They're inside. The bar is too shallow, 1.5 meters at low tide across most of its length. Sand and eelgrass and knee-deep water. Nothing that size can come across it. The mothers know this the way animals know things, which is to say they don't know it at all. They just keep doing what has always worked, and it keeps working. The whole lagoon is a fortress made of shallowness. By late morning, the wind comes up, as it does every day here, off the ocean and across the bar, and the flat water breaks into small chop with white edges. The heat arrives properly. There's a smell of drying eelgrass and something faintly sulphurous from the mudflats on the far side. Frigate birds hang in the sky without moving, adjusting a wingtip now and then, black and forked and effortless. You spend a couple of hours doing nothing in particular. You sit in the shade on the eastern side of the building, with your back against the wall. A lizard comes out onto the hot concrete, does a set of push-ups, and freezes. The wind makes a low, continuous sound through the wire fence behind the building. Somewhere a long way off, an engine runs for a minute and stops. In the afternoon, the tide goes out, and the lagoon empties itself in slow motion. Sandbars appear where there was open water. The whales move toward the deeper channels in the middle and gather there, and their breathing gets closer together, and you can see spouts hanging in the air for a second or two before the wind takes them apart. Herons walk the exposed edges with that stalking, deliberate step. 100 small crabs go sideways all at once when your shadow reaches them, and out past the bar, twice more, you see the water lift. The second time it's further away, and you almost miss it. The third time is around 4 in the afternoon, when the light has gone gold and low, and you're not looking, and something makes you look. The birds, maybe, the gulls that had been sitting on the outer sandbar, go up all together, without any obvious reason, and turn inland. Beyond them, out where the swell begins to build before it breaks, a shape passes underneath a wave. The wave is thin at the top, and the low sun is behind it. So for maybe 2 seconds, the water becomes a window, and in the window there's a body, gray-brown above, pale below, broad across the shoulders, in a way that fish are not usually broad, moving with one slow, lateral beat of the tail that carries it the whole length of the wave face. Then the wave breaks, and it's foam, and there's nothing. You sit down on the sand, not from shock, from something more like being briefly unable to hold a thought and stand at the same time. The sun goes down into the Pacific, and the whole lagoon turns copper, then rose, then a strange flat violet. The wind drops off exactly as the light goes, the way it does on coasts, and the water lays itself down again like a sheet being smoothed onto a bed. The whale's breathing comes back into the quiet, unhurried, spread out across the dark. Later, you go up the track behind the building to the ridge because someone told you the stars here are worth the walk. They are. The Milky Way is a real object, not a suggestion. A pale band with texture in it, thicker in places. There's no town light for 80 kilometers. Your eyes adapt over about 20 minutes, and the sky keeps producing more sky. The land smells completely different from the water. Dust and something dry and resinous from the low brush and the faint ammonia of somewhere animals sleep. The ground is loose stone that shifts under your shoes, and you go slowly. Down on the plain below, there are lights, a ranch, 3 or 4 buildings, and the pale, scattered shapes of cattle in a fenced field, standing the way cattle stand at night, packed closer than they'd be by day. Something moves along the fence line. You can't see it. You see the cattle's response. The whole group shifting at once, turning, a low collective sound that isn't quite lowing, more like a held breath let out slowly. They pack tighter, they face outward, then they stay very still. The dogs at the ranch start up, all of them, and keep going for 2 or 3 minutes, and then stop as suddenly as they began. You never see what was there. You never do on nights like this. There is only the shape of the reaction, and afterwards, a silence with a different texture than the silence before it. You walk back down. The track is easier going down. Behind the building, the shutter is still propped open, and the room has kept some of the day's heat. You lie down. Through the window, the lagoon breathes. Out in the middle of it, the whales are still exhaling at their own separate intervals, and the calves are still coming up more often than their mothers. And none of them are afraid, because in here, tonight, there is nothing to be afraid of. Out past the bar, the deep water goes on doing whatever it does. You listen to both, and somewhere in the space between the two sounds, the safe one and the far one, you stop keeping track of which is which. That's a day. One day, in one place, on a coast where a shallow sandbar is the entire difference between two worlds. But a lagoon can only protect what stays inside it. And in a few weeks, when the calves are strong enough, every one of those whales is going to swim out through the channel and turn north. They leave in March. The calves are stronger by then, thicker through the body, better at holding a breath, no longer needing to surface every minute, and one by one, the mothers turn toward the channel and take them out through the gap in the sandbar and into the open Pacific, and they turn north. It's about 8,000 kilometers to the feeding grounds in the Bering and Chukchi seas. Gray whales make one of the longest migrations of any mammal, and they do it in the most exposed way possible. Close to shore, in shallow water, moving at the pace of a walking human, a mother travels with her calf tucked against her flank on the landward side, using the coast itself as a shield on one flank, so she only has to watch the other. She does this because of orcas, and she has done it for a very long time. There's a place in Central California where the strategy fails. Off Monterey, a submarine canyon comes in close to the coast, and the shallow shelf the whales have been following simply stops. To continue north, they have to cross open, deep water. Orcas know this. Every spring, pods gather at that crossing and wait, and the encounters that follow have been documented for decades. It is the single most dangerous stretch of the entire journey. Now add a second hunter to that coastline, one that doesn't need to wait at a canyon. because the whole shallow route is exactly the kind of water it prefers. And this is where the story stops being about one animal and starts being about everything downstream of it. Because the first thing a large predator changes is not how many prey animals exist, it's where they are willing to go. We saw this on land with the wolves and the elk. In the ocean, it's been measured too. And the clearest example comes from Shark Bay in Western Australia, where researchers have spent years watching tiger sharks and the animals that avoid them. Shark Bay has vast seagrass meadows, and it has dugongs and green turtles that graze them. When tiger shark numbers are high in the warm months, the grazers change their behavior, moving out of the richest, shallowest seagrass into less rewarding but safer areas, and feeding in a more hurried, less thorough way. The sharks are not eating enough dugongs to matter numerically. They're eating enough to make certain meadows frightening, and that fear, spread across a whole bay, changes which patches of seagrass get eaten to the roots and which get to grow. Seagrass is not a small thing. Seagrass meadows stabilize sediment, shelter juvenile fish, and lock away carbon in the mud beneath them at rates that outperform most forests. A shift in where large grazers feel safe grazing is, several steps later, a shift in how much carbon a coastline holds. That's a tiger shark. Now put Megalodon on a migration route. The whales would not simply be eaten, some would be, but the larger effect would be that a corridor used for millions of years would become expensive. And migrating animals under pressure do one of a few things. They travel further offshore, into deeper water, which costs more energy and removes the coastal shield. They travel faster, which costs more energy still. They travel at different times, or they stop making the journey at all. That last option isn't theoretical. North Atlantic right whales spent decades gathering to feed in the Bay of Fundy, and researchers built their entire monitoring effort around that predictability. In the 2010s, the whale's prey shifted north with changing water temperatures, and the whales followed into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where nobody was watching, where the shipping lanes and fishing gear hadn't been adjusted for them. The population took years to find again, and paid heavily in the meantime. Animals abandon ancestral routes faster than we expect, and when they do, everything that was built around those routes is left standing in the wrong place. Here's a consequence that almost nobody thinks about. When a great whale dies of old age or illness, its body eventually sinks. It falls, sometimes for an hour, through the water column and lands on the abyssal plain. And there it becomes something extraordinary, a whale fall, in an environment where food arrives as a slow drizzle of particles from far above. 40 tons of flesh and bone hitting the seafloor is a catastrophe of abundance. The sequence is well documented. Scavengers arrive within hours. Sleeper sharks, hagfish by the hundreds, amphipods, and strip the soft tissue over months or years. Then a community of worms and crustaceans works the enriched sediment around the skeleton, and then, for decades afterwards, bacteria break down the lipids inside the bones themselves, producing sulfides that support chemosynthetic communities, much like those around deep-sea vents. There are bone-eating worms in the genus Osedax, discovered only in the early 2000s, that have no mouth and no gut and drill into whalebone using acid and symbiotic bacteria. Some species of animal are known only from whale falls and appear to exist nowhere else. A single whale carcass can feed a patch of abyssal seafloor for 50 years or more. Now consider what happens when large whales are routinely killed near the surface in shallow coastal water by an animal that dismembers them. Very little reaches the abyss intact. What does reach it arrives in the shallows, where it's consumed within days by a completely different set of animals. The deep sea would go hungry, not dramatically, not all at once, but as a slow thinning of the rain, and it would be happening to a system that has already lost most of its whale falls once during the 20th century, when we removed 3 million whales from the ocean. Some researchers think whale fall specialists are still recovering from that. A returned Megalodon would be a second withdrawal from an account never fully refilled. There's another whale service that would be interrupted, and it's the one that surprises people most. Whales fertilize the ocean. They feed at depth, on krill and fish in deep, nutrient-rich layers, and then they return to the surface to breathe and to defecate. Their waste is buoyant, and it carries iron and nitrogen into the sunlit surface waters where phytoplankton live and where those nutrients are often scarce. Researchers call it the whale pump. In parts of the Southern Ocean, whale faeces has been measured as a meaningful source of the iron that limits how much plankton can grow. Phytoplankton are the base of everything. They feed the krill that feed the whales. They feed the food chains that feed the fish that feed us, and they produce a very large share of the oxygen in the atmosphere. A whale that stops diving deep or stops migrating between deep feeding grounds and shallow breeding grounds, or simply dies before it does either enough times, is a nutrient conveyor that has stopped turning. None of this would look like anything from a boat. That's what makes it strange. You would see fewer spouts on the horizon, and eventually, someone would notice that the plankton blooms off a certain coast weren't what they used to be, and it would take a decade of careful work to connect the two. On land, the cascade would run faster and be far easier to see. North America currently has an enormous deer problem, and it's a predator problem wearing a different coat. White-tailed deer number in the tens of millions, and in many regions, they browse forest understory so intensively that the forest cannot replace itself. Seedlings are eaten, wildflowers vanish, shrub layers thin out, and the birds that nest in those shrub layers decline with them. Foresters in parts of the eastern United States describe woods with a distinct browse line, everything edible stripped to a uniform height, the ground beneath open and bare. Deer also carry the ticks that carry Lyme disease, and there are somewhere over 1 million collisions between vehicles and deer in the United States every year. Now introduce a large ambush predator that specializes in exactly this kind of animal. The first change would be numerical and modest. The second change would be behavioral and enormous. Deer would stop feeding in the places where a heavy cat can wait. The woodland edges, the brushy draws, the field margins at dusk, and the understory in those places would begin to come back. Seedlings would clear the browse height. Shrub nesting birds would return to the layer that reappeared. You'd also see something reverse that ecologists have been documenting for years. Mesopredator release. When large carnivores disappear, mid-sized ones expand. Coyotes across the whole of North America, raccoons and foxes in suburbs, and they press hard on ground-nesting birds, reptiles, and small mammals. Put something large back at the top, and the middle of the pyramid gets squeezed back down. None of it would be gentle, and it's worth being straight about the other half of the ledger. livestock losses would be immediate and serious. Ranchers who currently lose a handful of animals a year to coyotes would be losing far more to something they cannot fence out. Rural life near any of these animals would change in ways no ecological benefit would console anyone about. And the whole thing would take decades. Cascades are slow. The first years would be pure disruption, populations crashing and overshooting, prey species making bad choices, systems oscillating hard before they settle. Ecologists studying the Yellowstone wolves are still arguing about the results after 30 years. There's one more thing, and it's the honest heart of this chapter. Returning a predator to the modern world would not restore the old world. It couldn't. The old world had 100 other pieces that came with it: the herds, the shelves, the climate, the coastlines. The whole cast we walked through earlier put one piece back into a machine that has been rebuilt around its absence, and you don't get the original machine. You get a third thing, something that has never existed before, and that nobody has any way to predict. Which brings us to the far end of that thought, because there's a version of this scenario where the changes don't settle at all, where one shift feeds the next, and the ocean itself begins to reorganize around a single returned animal. Let's follow it out to the edge and see where it goes. Let's follow one thread all the way to its end. Start with the lagoons, Ojo de Liebre, San Ignacio, Magdalena Bay, and their equivalents everywhere: the Hawaiian channels, the Silverbank, the bays of Peninsula Valdez, the shallow water off Western Australia, where humpbacks bring their calves. Every one of them exists for the same reason. Warm water is cheap for a newborn. A calf is born without much insulation, and in cold water, it spends its energy staying alive instead of growing. So, the mothers make the enormous journey every year to give their young a few months in water that doesn't take heat away from them. The trade has always been worth it. Now put a hunter at the door of every one of those places, and the arithmetic changes. Not immediately. Whales are long-lived and conservative, and migration routes are learned. A calf follows its mother and remembers, and takes its own calf the same way decades later. That kind of knowledge is durable. It resists a bad year or 10 bad years. But it doesn't resist forever. Fidelity to a route is only as strong as the survival of the animals that carry it. The mothers who keep going to the dangerous lagoon leave fewer descendants than the ones who, for whatever reason, a wrong turn, a late start, an unusually cold winter, end up calving somewhere else and get away with it. And there is somewhere else. There's always been somewhere else. It's just been colder. So here is the far end of this scenario, and it has the strange quality of being both the most extreme outcome and the most quietly plausible one. Over some number of decades, the great whales stop coming to the tropics. They calve further south or further north at the edges of the cold. The journey gets shorter, which saves energy, but the water is harsher, and calf mortality rises for reasons that have nothing to do with predators. Some populations shift only partly. Some abandon a breeding ground entirely within a single human lifetime. Sperm whales, which range everywhere, contract toward deeper and cooler water. Humpbacks find whatever refuges the map still offers. And the warm ocean, the enormous band of blue that wraps this planet around the middle, the water everyone pictures when they picture the sea, gradually stops being a place where great whales raise their young. Think about what that means for the animal that caused Ityat Megalodon's entire existence would depend on those shallow warm water gatherings. It cannot follow the whales into the cold. That's the whole reason the warm belt is its territory in the first place. So in driving its prey out of reach, it would be walking the same road that ended it 3.5 million years ago. Same mechanism, same outcome, just running faster, because this time the ocean starts with far fewer whales in it and far less slack. The scenario, taken to its logical end, contains its own ending. Bring it back, and it eats its way to the same door it left through, except that the modern ocean has something in it that the Pliocene ocean did not. And this is the turn that makes the whole thing genuinely unsettling, rather than merely tragic. The Pliocene had no aquaculture. Right now, humans farm something over 100 million tons of aquatic animals a year, and a large share of it happens in the sea, in net pens, salmon in Norway and Chile and Scotland, tuna fattened in cages off Malta and Mexico and Australia, sea bass and bream throughout the Mediterranean, cobia and barramundi in warm water. The pens sit anchored in coastal bays and increasingly further offshore, each one holding tens of thousands of fish in a volume of water where they could never naturally occur at such density. There's more. Wild capture fisheries pull something in the region of 80 to 90 million tons a year, most of it concentrated by nets and lines into dense, struggling, noisy masses. Long lines run for kilometers with baited hooks, purse seen as close around entire schools. Trawlers discard unwanted catch by the ton. And here's the thing. Predators have already worked this out. In the Southern Ocean, orcas and sperm whales have learned to strip Patagonian toothfish off long lines as they're hauled, recognizing the sound of the winch arriving before the gear surfaces, taking the fish and leaving the heads on the hooks. It costs those fisheries real money, and it has been going on for decades. Sea lions raid salmon pens. Sharks patrol the outsides of net cages. Seabirds follow trawlers by the thousand. Bears learn garbage dumps. Gulls learn landfills. Monkeys learn temples. Foxes learn cities. Any animal capable of learning will learn where the free food is. That is not a special property of intelligence. It's a property of being hungry and paying attention. So run the scenario again. With that included, a returned Megalodon drives the whales out of the warm belt. It faces starvation, and then, somewhere off Chile or Norway or the Mediterranean, one individual takes a pen, not the fish inside, the pen itself. 50 tons of animal against a net structure designed to resist storms and seals. What it finds is a concentration of food that no natural system has ever produced. A single large salmon pen can hold 200 tons of fish in a space the size of a swimming pool. It doesn't run. It doesn't scatter. It's held in place by us, on purpose, and topped up on a schedule. And the same logic applies to the trawler's discard plume, and the purse Sani's compressed school, and the long lines kilometers of hooked fish, and the aquaculture cluster that lights up a whole bay. The extreme end of this scenario is not that a giant shark eats all the whales. It's that after eating the whales out of the tropics, it doesn't die. It converts. It becomes, functionally, a subsidized animal, an apex predator, sustained not by the ocean's own productivity, but by ours. And a subsidized predator is not limited by the thing that would normally limit it. It doesn't need enough whales. It needs enough of us. and there are more of us every year, farming more fish every year, in warmer water every year, which closes the trap on the whales completely, because their exile from the tropics would normally be temporary. The predator starves, the pressure lifts, the routes return over centuries. If the predator doesn't starve, the exile is permanent. The warm ocean stays empty of them for as long as the fish farms keep running. The land version of this is less dramatic and more immediate. Smilodon would face the same problem. Wild prey learns. Wild prey disperses. Wild prey stops standing in the dangerous places. But wild prey isn't the abundant option. Livestock is. There are roughly 1.5 billion cattle on this planet, standing in open fields, unable to leave, selected over thousands of years for docility, guarded by fences that were designed to keep animals in rather than out. A predator that specialized in large, slow, unwary herbivores would find the modern world stocked to a degree the Pleistocene never approached, and it would never need to hunt anything wild again. That's the pattern in both cases, and it's the thing I'd want you to take from this part. The extreme outcome isn't destruction, it's substitution. The returned animals wouldn't compete with human civilization. They'd plug into it. They'd discover that we have spent a century concentrating protein into predictable, immobile, well-lit locations, and that this is the single greatest gift a large predator could be given. We would become their ecosystem. And there's one more layer, quieter than all of it. None of this would be visible. Stand on any beach in the world during this entire process, and it would look exactly as it does now. Blue water, white edges, birds. The changes would be happening at the scale of migration routes and breeding grounds and abyssal food supply, measured in research papers, in survey counts that come in a little lower each decade, in a lagoon somewhere that used to fill with whales in February and now doesn't. The most extreme consequence of bringing back the largest predator that ever hunted would not be a scene. It would be an absence, distributed across an ocean, arriving so slowly that no single person would ever witness it happening. That's the far edge of the thought experiment. It's abstract, and it's oceanic, and it's a long way from anything you could touch. So let's bring it back in. Let's stop talking about migration corridors and carbon and nutrient cycles and ask the question you've probably been circling since the beginning. What would it actually mean for you, for a family at a beach in July, for a fishing town, for the price of things, for the ordinary, daily, unremarkable business of living on a planet where those animals exist again? If you're still here with me, drifting along, thank you. If these journeys help you rest, you can quietly follow the channel so the next one finds you. Now, let's continue. Here's the thing about fear. It doesn't scale with danger. It never has. Right now, worldwide, there are somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 unprovoked shark bites on humans in a typical year. And of those, roughly 5 to 10 are fatal. That's the whole planet. Every beach, every reef, every surfer, every swimmer, every year. In the same year, around 230,000 people drown. The water itself, plain, ordinary water, with nothing in it at all, kills tens of thousands of times more people than every shark species combined. And yet, nobody stands at the edge of the sea and thinks about buoyancy. They think about fins. We know exactly when that got worse too. A film came out in 1975 about a great white shark off a small island town, and it was extraordinarily well made, and it rearranged the relationship between an entire culture and the ocean. The author of the novel it was based on spent much of the rest of his life advocating for shark conservation, describing a kind of regret about what the story had done. Shark populations in the Western Atlantic fell steeply in the decades that followed, for many reasons, but the willingness of the public to care about it was not among the things working in their favor. So before we imagine the practical consequences of Megalodon's return, we should be clear that human beings would not respond to it proportionately. We'd respond to it the way we respond to everything with teeth, enormously, expensively, and with our attention pointed at the wrong end of the risk. But let's do the practical part anyway, because the reality is more interesting than the panic. If you're standing in the surf on a summer afternoon, in water up to your chest, you are physically safe from an animal of that size, not because it wouldn't want to be there, because it cannot be there. 16 meters of shark with a 2-meter dorsal fin requires water with depth in it. The surf zone, the sandbar, the shallow warm shelf, where families actually spend their beach day, that's a meter, maybe 2. It's the same reason the whales in the lagoon were safe. Shallowness is a wall. The risk wouldn't fall on swimmers, it would fall on the people who go out past the wall. And that's where the picture stops being about holidays and starts being about livelihoods. Consider what's actually out there, beyond the shallows, in the warm belt of the world. Not cruise ships, small boats, open wooden and fiberglass hulls, 5 to 8 meters, 1 or 2 outboard engines, 3 or 4 people aboard, working reefs and drop-offs at dawn. There are millions of these boats. They are how a very large share of the tropical world eats. Something on the order of 3 billion people obtain a meaningful part of their animal protein from aquatic foods. Hundreds of millions depend on fisheries and aquaculture for their income, and the overwhelming majority of those are small-scale operators in West Africa, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, coastal South America, the Indian Ocean. They fish in exactly the warm, shallow to medium water we've been describing, in vessels that a 50-ton animal could capsize without meaning to. There's a precedent for this that isn't hypothetical at all. Since 2020, off the coasts of Portugal, Spain, and Morocco, a small group of orcas has been interacting with sailing yachts, approaching from behind, striking and biting the rudder, sometimes for hours. Hundreds of encounters have been logged. A handful of boats have been damaged badly enough to sink. Nobody knows for certain why it started. The leading suggestions involve a single individual and a behavior that spread socially through her group. Those are 6-ton animals engaging with 15-meter vessels out of what appears to be curiosity or play. Scale that up 8-fold in mass and downward in boat size, and you have the daily working conditions of tropical, small-scale fishing. So the first honest thing to say about the human cost is that it wouldn't be distributed evenly. Tourists at a resort would lose an experience. Fishing families 3 coastlines away would lose their access to the sea. That asymmetry is how almost every environmental change works, and it's rarely mentioned in the dramatic version of the story. Then there's food and cost. If aquaculture pens in warm coastal water become vulnerable, physically damaged, repeatedly by something no netting was ever designed to resist, the operators do one of 3 things. They armor the pens, which is expensive. They move them into colder water or further offshore into stronger currents, which is expensive. Or they stop And whichever they choose, the price of farmed fish goes up worldwide because those regions supply a global market that lands hardest on households where fish is the cheap protein rather than the expensive one. Insurance would change quietly and comprehensively. Marine hull policies, port operations, offshore construction, cable laying, anything with a diver in the water. And then there is the thing I suspect would actually happen, and it's the least dramatic and the most certain. We would try to kill them. I don't say that as an accusation. I say it because it is what we have done, without exception, everywhere, with every large predator. For as long as there have been records, wolves were exterminated from nearly all of Western Europe and most of the contiguous United States. Bears were pushed out of Britain, Ireland, most of France, and Germany. Lions once ranged from Greece through the Middle East into India, and now hold a single forest in Gujarat. Tigers are gone from most of their historical range. And in the ocean, specifically, the response already exists as policy. Queensland and New South Wales have operated shark control programs since the 1930s and 1960s. Nets and baited drumlines strung along popular beaches. Over the decades, they have killed tens of thousands of animals, including large numbers of species that were never the target: rays, turtles, dolphins, harmless sharks. The programs remain politically difficult to end because the fear they address is real to the people who feel it, whatever the statistics say. So the realistic timeline of this whole scenario probably isn't ecological at all. Bring back Megalodon, and you'd get perhaps a decade of astonishment. Documentaries, research, funding at a scale marine science has never seen, tracking tags, acoustic arrays, satellite programs, an entire generation of scientists redirected. There'd be tourism, enormous tourism. Whale watching already draws something like 13 million people a year and generates billions. A chance to see the largest predator that ever lived would eclipse it completely, and towns would be built on it. And running alongside all of that, from year one, there would be a parallel effort, quieter, better funded, less photographed, to reduce the number of them, first around ports, then around aquaculture, then around fishing grounds, then eventually everywhere, for reasons that would be phrased as safety and would be, in fairness, partly true. The animal that survived 20 million years and was undone by a slow cooling of the planet would, the second time, last about as long as we let it. On land, it would be faster still. A predator that takes livestock has never survived contact with agriculture anywhere in the world. Not once. But I want to end this part somewhere other than the practicalities, because there's something underneath all of it that I think is the real answer to how would it affect us. Almost nobody alive today knows what it is to be prey. For nearly the entire span of our species' existence, that was simply part of being a person. You did not walk certain places after dark. You did not sleep on the ground alone. You kept a fire. There are fossils of early hominins with puncture marks in the skull that match the canines of a leopard. Being eaten was a normal category of death. That ended so recently and so completely that we've forgotten it was ever the arrangement. There are perhaps a few 100 million people left on Earth who live in genuine daily proximity to animals that could kill and eat them, in parts of India, in the Sundarbans, in areas of sub-Saharan Africa, in the Russian Far East. For everyone else, the sensation is entirely recreational, We pay money to feel a diluted version of it. Bringing back a great predator wouldn't just add an animal to the map, it would return a fact about existence that we retired and that our nervous systems still carry the wiring for. The reason a fin on the horizon empties your stomach isn't ignorance. It's memory, older than language, older than our species, kept intact by evolution because for a very long time it was the difference between the people who got out of the water and the people who didn't. We would be frightened. We would be frightened out of all proportion, and underneath the disproportion would be something perfectly accurate. A very old part of us recognizing a very old situation and being right about it. That's the human answer. Now let's ask the one you might have been holding this whole time. The question underneath the whole scenario. Could any of it actually happen? Not in imagination, in a laboratory, with real DNA and real money and real people who are already trying. Let's look at where that work honestly stands. Let's be straight with each other, because the honest answer here is more interesting than a comfortable one. DNA does not last. That's the whole story in 4 words. But the details are worth having. DNA is a molecule held together by chemical bonds, and those bonds break slowly, steadily, from water, from heat, from background radiation, from the ordinary chemistry of a body that has stopped defending itself. It happens whether the specimen is buried in mud or sealed in ice. Ice only slows it. In 2012, a team measured this directly. They used a large set of moa bones from New Zealand, dozens of specimens, all from similar sites, spanning a wide range of ages, which let them calculate an actual rate of decay rather than an estimate. What they found was a half-life for short DNA fragments of roughly 520 years under those conditions. Every 5 centuries, half of what remained was gone. Run that forward and the arithmetic is brutal. Even in permanently frozen ground at several degrees below zero, the last readable bonds would be expected to disappear somewhere around 6.5 million years. And long before that, what's left is far too fragmented to reassemble into anything meaningful. The practical record backs this up. The oldest DNA ever sequenced from an animal comes from mammoth teeth, recovered from Siberian permafrost, dated to around 1 million years old, possibly a little more. It was extraordinarily difficult work. The sequences came in tiny broken pieces and had to be reconstructed statistically. And in 2022, researchers recovered environmental DNA, fragments in sediment rather than in a body, from a formation in northern Greenland dated to about 2 million years, and used it to reconstruct an entire vanished ecosystem. Poplars, birches, reindeer, hares, and mastodons living far above the Arctic Circle, 2 million years, in permanently frozen sediment in the coldest reasonable conditions on Earth. Megalodon died out 3.5 million years ago in warm seawater. So let me say it plainly, without hedging. There is no Megalodon DNA. There will never be Megalodon DNA. It is not a matter of better technology or more funding or a luckier specimen. The information is not degraded. It is absent. The molecules that carried it came apart into their component atoms long before our species existed, and those atoms have been recycled through several million years of ocean chemistry since. The same applies, with room to spare, to Titanoboa at 58 million years, to Deinosuchus at 75, to Dunkleosteus at 360, and to every dinosaur that ever lived. Amber doesn't help. Repeated attempts to recover DNA from insects in amber have failed, and the famous early claims did not replicate. That's the wall. It's a real wall, and it isn't moving. Now, here's what's on the other side of it. And this is where the story becomes genuinely remarkable. Because within the last few 100,000 years, everything changes. Mammoths have been fully sequenced from multiple individuals at high quality thanks to permafrost. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, gone since 1936, had its genome published in 2017 from specimens preserved in museum jars, and in 2023 a team recovered RNA from a preserved thylacine, the first RNA ever obtained from an extinct species. RNA is far more fragile than DNA and had generally been considered unrecoverable, and predators are on the list. In 2020, researchers published nuclear genome data from Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat, a genuine saber-tooth predator, recovered from permafrost in the Yukon. In 2021, a team sequenced the dire wolf and produced a genuine surprise. Dire wolves turned out not to be close cousins of gray wolves at all, but the last survivors of a lineage that had separated millions of years earlier. They looked similar because they did the same job, not because they were related. So the honest boundary is roughly this: anything that died out within the last few 100,000 years and left remains in cold or very dry conditions is potentially readable. Anything older is not. But even inside that boundary, there's a second thing worth understanding, because it's usually glossed over. De-extinction, as it's actually being pursued, is not cloning. Cloning requires an intact cell nucleus, a whole, undamaged set of chromosomes taken from a living or freshly preserved cell, transferred into an egg. It has been done with an extinct animal exactly once. In 2003, Spanish and French researchers cloned the bucardo, a Pyrenean ibex whose last individual had died in 2000, using tissue frozen while she was still alive. A kid was born. It lived for a few minutes and died of a lung malformation. It remains the only animal ever brought back from extinction and the only animal ever to go extinct twice. For everything else, there are no intact cells, which means the actual method is different. You sequence the extinct genome as well as you can. Compare it to the genome of the closest living relative. Identify the differences that matter, and then edit those changes into the living animal cells. What you produce is not the extinct species. It's a modified version of a living one, carrying some number of ancestral traits: cold tolerance, coat type, body proportions. That distinction became a public argument in 2025 when a company announced it had produced pups engineered from gray wolf cells, carrying a small number of edits based on dire wolf genomes, and presented them as dire wolves. A great many geneticists disagreed with the framing. The animals were real, and the work was real. Whether a gray wolf with a couple of dozen edits is a dire wolf is a question about definitions as much as biology, and it hasn't been settled. Apply that method to Megalodon, and it collapses immediately. The closest living relatives, the great white, the mako, sit on a branch that separated tens of millions of years ago, with millions upon millions of genetic differences, none of which we can identify because we have nothing to compare against. And even if you somehow had the genome, you would need somewhere to grow the animal. Megalodon, like its lamnid relatives, almost certainly gestated internally. with embryos feeding on unfertilized eggs inside the mother. Emerging already 2 meters long, there is no surrogate, there is no egg, there is no womb on Earth that could carry it. So that's the laboratory answer. No, which leaves the other door, the one people always reach for when the first one closes. Not bring it back, never gone. And I want to give this one a fair hearing, because the premise underneath it is completely true. We really do not know the ocean. Something like a quarter of the seafloor has been mapped to modern resolution, and that figure is the result of a huge international effort over the last decade. We have better topographic maps of Mars. Marine biologists describe roughly 2,000 new species a year, and they are not all microscopic. The megamouth shark, a filter-feeding shark over 5 meters long, was completely unknown to science until one became tangled in a ship's anchor in 1976. Omura's whale wasn't recognized as its own species until 2003 and wasn't properly observed alive in the wild until 2015. A new species of beaked whale was formally described in 2019. In 2025, a colossal squid was filmed alive in its natural habitat for the first time. A juvenile, small and glassy, more than a century after the species was first named, from remains found in whale stomachs. Large things do hide. That part is real. But Megalodon is not among them. And the reason why is elegant enough that it settles the question. Sharks shed teeth constantly, not occasionally, continuously, throughout life, replacing them in rolling rows, thousands of teeth per individual over a lifetime. Those teeth are dense, mineralized, and virtually indestructible. They are, in fact, the reason we know Megalodon existed at all. If Megalodon were still alive anywhere in the ocean, it would be raining teeth into modern sediment right now in enormous numbers. We dredge, trawl, core, and survey the seafloor across the entire globe. We have never found a single Megalodon tooth in sediment younger than about 3.5 million years. And there's the habitat problem. Megalodon was not a deep-sea animal. Every line of evidence, nursery sites in shallow bays, prey consisting of coastal whales and seals, a body built for warm surface water, points to it living in exactly the part of the ocean we occupy most heavily. The unexplored deep is not a hiding place for it. It's the wrong environment entirely. So no, it isn't down there. The absence is not a gap in our searching. It's a positive finding. But before this sounds like the door simply closing, look at what's actually being achieved in its place, because I find it more astonishing than the fantasy. We can now read a 2-million-year-old ecosystem out of a handful of frozen dirt. Not the animals, just the traces they left in the ground. And from that reconstruct, which trees grew there and which animals walked among them, we can recover ancient proteins, which survive far longer than DNA. Enamel proteins from a nearly 2-million-year-old specimen have been sequenced and used to place it on the family tree. We can determine an extinct shark's body temperature from the isotopes locked in its tooth enamel. We can look at the growth bands inside a fossil vertebra and count the years of an animal's life, one by one, the way you'd count rings in a tree. We cannot bring Megalodon back, but we can tell you approximately how warm it was, roughly how fast it grew, where its young were born, what it ate, how it bit, and why it left. We have learned to read the dead so carefully that we no longer need to raise them. And that, I think, is worth sitting with for a moment. 252 million years ago, before the dinosaurs, before flowers, before anything you could reasonably call a mammal, there was an animal in what is now northern Russia with saber teeth in its mouth. Its name is Inostrancevia. It was found at the end of the 19th century in riverbank deposits along the northern Dvina, and it was named after a Russian geologist. It reached something over 3 meters in length, with a skull around 60 centimeters long, and upper canines that could exceed 15 centimeters. Long, curved, and flattened into blades. If you saw only the skull, you would assume it was a big cat. It was not a cat, and it was not a reptile, and it was not a dinosaur. It belonged to a group called the Gorgonopsians, which sit on the branch of the tree of life that eventually leads to us. It was, in the loosest possible sense, closer kin to a mammal than to a crocodile, and it hunted in a world where the continents were fused into one landmass, and the largest land animals were things most people have never heard of, which means the saber-tooth, that specific, iconic, unmistakable shape, was invented roughly 250 million years before Smilodon ever set foot in California, and then it was invented again and again. That's the part worth sitting with. Long, blade-like upper canines have appeared independently in at least 5 separate lineages of predator in animals that were not closely related and often lived tens of millions of years apart. The Gorgonopsians had them in the Permian. A group called Nimravids, cat-like, but not cats, had them around 35 million years ago. The Barbarophilids had them after that. The true saber-toothed cats, Smilodon and Homotherium among them, had them in the last few million years. And in South America, entirely separately, a marsupial called Thylacosmilus evolved saber teeth so extreme that they grew continuously throughout life, and their roots extended back over the top of the skull. A pouched mammal on an isolated continent, arriving at the same solution as a pre-dinosaur synapsid a 250 million years earlier. Nature does not remember what it has already built. It simply keeps arriving at the same answers, because the problem keeps having the same shape: large prey, thick hide, a need to end things quickly. The world hands out the same question, and life keeps writing the same knife. There's a more recent discovery about Inostrancevia that makes it stranger still, and I think it's the single most relevant fact in this entire chapter. In 2023, researchers announced that they had found Inostrancevia fossils in the Karoo Basin of South Africa, not Russia, South Africa, around 11,000 kilometers away across the ancient supercontinent. The context is what matters. In that South African ecosystem, the local top predators, a group of large Gorgonopsians called rubigenes, had died out. Their position was vacant, and into that vacancy, from an enormous distance, came a foreign predator that had never lived there before. It occupied the role, and then, within a geologically brief span, it disappeared too, as the end-Permian extinction rolled through and removed something like 80 to 90% of species in the sea. The apex position in that ecosystem turned over at least 4 times in a very short interval. 4 different animals held the same job, one after another, each arriving into the space the last one had left. That is not an unusual story. That is the normal story, seen clearly for once. Look back across everything we've walked through and you'll see the same pattern in every direction, the role of enormous marine macro-predator, the animal that hunts other large animals in open water, has never once been permanently vacant and has never once been held permanently by anyone. Dunkleosteus held a version of it in the Devonian seas with jawbones that sharpened themselves. Later it belonged to marine reptiles, plesiosaurs, then mosasaurs, air-breathing hunters that filled the Cretaceous oceans and vanished with the asteroid. Then it passed to sharks and to whales, Megalodon and Leviathan, holding it simultaneously in the same water for millions of years. And when both were gone, it went to the orca, which holds it today. 4 completely unrelated groups of animals: fish, reptile, shark, mammal, one position refilled over and over across 400 million years by whoever happened to be available. The ambush hunter at the water's edge is stranger still, because that one barely changed hands at all. Deinosuchus was doing the job 75 million years ago in the rivers of North America, and the animal doing it today in the rivers of Northern Australia looks so similar that a non-specialist would struggle to tell the skulls apart. Some roles are so well solved that evolution simply stops revising. The crocodile is not primitive, it is finished. Then there are the roles that depend on conditions rather than on competitors. Titanoboa is the clearest example. It didn't lose its position to a rival. It lost the climate that made its position possible. There is a maximum size a cold-blooded predator can reach, and that ceiling is set by temperature. When the world cooled, the ceiling came down, and the role of giant constrictor didn't pass to anyone. It was simply withdrawn from the catalog to be reissued if the planet ever warms enough again. Arctodus, the short-faced bear, occupied something more ambiguous, a huge, powerful animal that probably spent much of its time taking over other predators' kills, a role that requires there to be plenty of kills lying around to take. When the great herds went, that job went with them, and nothing since has been large enough to reinstate it. And Haast's eagle shows how quickly a role can be invented and destroyed. New Zealand had no land mammals, so birds took every position, including large herbivore. That created a vacancy for something to hunt them, and a fairly ordinary eagle expanded in perhaps 1 million years or two into the largest eagle that has ever existed. It was a role that only existed on those 2 islands, and only for as long as the moa did, created by isolation, ended by contact. So here's the shape that emerges when you stand far enough back. The natural world is not a collection of animals. It's a collection of positions, ways of making a living, defined by the energy available and the bodies of everything else. Predator at the top of the water column, ambusher at the river's edge, sprinter on open plains, something that eats the big slow things, and something that eats what's left. Species come and go through those positions the way people move through jobs. In a very old institution, the staff turns over, the work continues, which is why the question we started with, could we bring one back, is a slightly different question than it first appears. You cannot restore an animal to a position that something else is currently holding, and you cannot restore a position that the world has stopped funding. Megalodon's job was abolished when the warm, shallow seas emptied of small whales. Bringing back the employee does not reopen the department, but there's a counterweight to all of this, and without it, the whole picture goes cold in a way I don't think is honest. Deep time makes everything look replaceable from far enough away. Inostrancevia and Smilodon are the same solution reached twice, and Megalodon and the orca are the same solution reached twice. And it all becomes a kind of patient machinery, grinding out the same shapes forever. That's true, and it's also the least important thing about any of them, because Inostrancevia was not a position, it was an animal, with a particular gait and a particular way of holding its head, that walked 11,000 kilometers across a dying supercontinent and arrived somewhere new. It had a heartbeat and a body temperature and a specific number of days. Megalodon was not a job description. It was a mother returning to a warm bay and a pup 2 meters long, learning what its own body could do in water, shallow enough to see the bottom. The role recurs. The animal does not. Every one of them happened exactly once, and every one of them is over. And the strangest part, the part that never quite resolves, no matter how long you look at it, is that this is also true of everything currently alive. The orca teaching her daughter to strand on a shingle beach in Patagonia, the pronghorn still outrunning a cat that has been dead 10,000 years, the gray whale mother in a lagoon in February, lying on her side to turn around in water she can nearly touch the bottom of. They are all standing in positions that something else held before them and that something else will hold after. They just don't know it, and it doesn't matter. And the day goes on exactly the same either way. Go back to the beach. Same one from the beginning. The tide is out further than you expected. The water flat and gray. The town behind you quiet, and you're still holding the tooth. Look at it properly now that you know what it is. It's heavier than a tooth should be, and that's the clue. It isn't really a tooth anymore. Buried in sediment, groundwater carried minerals through it and swapped them molecule by molecule for the original material. What's in your hand is a stone copy formed inside the shape of the real thing, keeping every detail, the serrations, the fine ridges near the root, the slight lean that tells you which side of the jaw it sat in. The color came from the sediment, black from phosphates, brown from iron. The rock wrote itself into the shape of an animal that had been gone for ages before the writing started. And here's the small thing I keep coming back to. This tooth fell out. That's all. No death, no final moment. Sharks shed teeth continuously. Rows rolling forward, thousands dropped over a lifetime. On some unremarkable afternoon in warm, shallow water, this one came loose and sank, and the animal swam on with a replacement already moving into place, and never noticed. The most ordinary event of its life, and the only reason you know it existed at all. So the answer to what we asked at the start is no. The DNA came apart into its atoms somewhere in the long Pliocene, and those atoms have been through several million years of ocean since, through plankton and bone and rain and rock, not degraded, dispersed, and the world it would return to was rebuilt without it. The shelves reorganized. The whales became travelers, and the position at the top of the water went to something that hunts as a family and teaches its daughters. The gap closed a long time ago. It was never really a gap, only a handover. That's what all of them show, lined up together. Inostrancevia, walking 11,000 kilometers across a joined continent into a vacancy someone else had left, holding it briefly, going down with everything else, the saber-tooth, invented and forgotten and invented again 5 separate times by animals that never met. Titanoboa ended by nothing more dramatic Then the world's average temperature drifting a few degrees. The eagle over New Zealand, following its moa out within a century and a half. And the pronghorn, still out there on the high plains right now, running faster than anything alive can chase from a cat that has been dead 10,000 years. The world keeps the habits, it just stops keeping the animals. The tide is turning. You hear it before you see it. A fullness under the flatness. The first thin sheet comes further up the sand than the last. Stops, slides back, leaving a dark edge. Then another. The bar you walked out onto will be underwater within the hour. You could keep the tooth. People do. It would sit on a shelf for 30 years and be picked up now and then and put back down. Or you could set it where you found it. Feel the weight one more time, the smooth face, the rough edge that still, after 20 million years, catches faintly against your thumb. Then open your hand. The water reaches it a few minutes later, darkens the sand around it, then under it. The grains beneath begin to move. It settles a few millimeters, another wave, a little deeper. By the time the tide is properly in, it's gone from view, not lost, just back where it was, in the sediment, in the dark, in the slow, patient chemistry that has held it all this time and will hold it for however long comes next. The lagoon fills. Out in the middle, the whales go on breathing at their own separate intervals, and the calves come up more often than their mothers, and none of them know anything about any of this. The stars come round, and the sea does what it has always done, which is nothing in particular, at enormous scale. Forever, sleep well, and if you'd like another, the channel will be waiting.